Hi again. Third video, all made today. As you can tell, my clothes haven't changed. It's good doing these back to back, so you can move on to other things. Anyway, this probably the last video in this scientific method little mini series, unless we decide to come up with something else later, is just for the question: is psychology scientific? Khalees has mentioned on the blog a couple of times that she's really into the show Bones. It's a crime show. I've watched it a couple of times with her. It's really well written, really good, I think. But the main character, Temperance Brennan, I think is her name, nicknamed Bones, has a real beef against psychology in general, at least early in the show, that she outright calls it unscientific and mocks it a lot. And it's actually an attitude that I run into sometimes, but more often than that, I run into the concern of people who say, I want to believe in this stuff, but they worry that it's unscientific. They don't want it to be unscientific, but they worry. People tell me it's unscientific. So, is psychology scientific, and is personality typing specifically scientific? Well, it all depends if the person who's doing it is following a scientific method or not. And as Khalees has mentioned recently on the blog, many people are very unscientific about personality typing. Of course, people can be unscientific about all kinds of things. So if something follows a scientific method, if it follows the method reliably, if it experiments on hypotheses in a way that's repeatable and testable, that you can let nature speak for itself, then that's scientific, it's useful. If they're not doing that, if they're saying, well, here's what I think it is, does it make sense, that's cool, but it's not science. It's just a hypothesis. They haven't made it testable yet. So they say, well, this makes total sense. Can't you see the patterns? Patterns are great. But that's not experimented science yet. You have to say it has to be demonstrable, it has to be something that everyone else can see, it has to be repeatable and letting reality speak for itself. So again, is it science? Well, only if it follows scientific method. If it does, then it's science and it's useful and reliable that way. If it doesn't, then it might be great, it might even be right, but it's not science in that sense. And again, like I said, this can apply to anything. For instance, string theory. For people who have heard about it, it's a theoretical physics idea. I'm not going to go into describing it too much right now. But string theory is an interesting and very fun little theory that generally you hear people think of string theory, oh, that's all science, it's sciencey. Well, it may sound like a very classically sciencey topic, but for the most part, as of 2014, we lack sufficient facilities to test it enough. It's not that they can't experiment upon it, it's that we can't yet experiment sufficiently upon it, because we just need more advanced facilities in order to test this theory. So in many cases, it's still largely a hypothesis. It hasn't. So it's a very sciencey thing. String theory sounds all sciencey, but the thing is, things have to go through sufficient rigorous experiment to be really following a scientific method. So I'm not trying to bash string theory. I'm using it as an example of something that's classically sciencey, that without experimentation, you can't really truly call it science yet. Does that make sense? Now, I mention this because oftentimes you have people who like to proclaim themselves, oh, I'm so logical, I'm so scientific. Generally, people who proclaim themselves that way, they have an emotional need to proclaim themselves that way. Otherwise, they would stop proclaiming it and just do it. But the people who are so busy trying to tell everyone, like I was talking to some friends the other day who were annoyed because they were talking to a very bullheaded guy who, like, throughout the entire conversation kept saying, oh, I'm so logical, I'm so scientific, while being boing, you couldn't get anything through to him. He decided he wanted to believe, and no evidence or anything was going to change that. Well, that's not scientific. But he's called himself very logical and very scientific because he was interested in classically sciencey subjects, if that makes sense. And so just because you're interested in theoretical physics, which is a very scientific field, doesn't mean you yourself are being scientific about it. Just because you're interested in psychology or personality typing doesn't mean you yourself are following a scientific method in regards to it. So being interested in sciencey subjects does not make you a scientifically minded person. Applying a scientific method to anything in your life, that is being scientifically minded. And again, by my experience, there's nothing there's nothing that I have not been able to apply a scientific method to. I've been able to apply it to everything in my life, and it's really great. It's very cool, useful system. I'm not trying to make it the end all be all. I'm saying it's a healthy, great system that our society should really follow more often. How can we expect to understand anything more if we won't even follow a scientific method? So, if people parade around their own personal beliefs and hypotheses if they're facts just because they're on a sciencey subject, that's not scientific. No topic is inherently scientific or unscientific. A lot of people want to say, well, this topic's totally unscientific. No. The approach to the topic is what makes it scientific or unscientific. You can approach any topic in a scientific way or in an unscientific way. So anyway, yeah. So back to psychology personality typing specifically, there are a lot of the popular versions that are very unscientific. They just, like Lisa mentioned, they don't hold up in practice. They're not verifiable, they're not repeatable. These generalization oversimplifications may sound very nice on paper, but in practice, it's not the way it is. For instance, saying that your personality type always likes to paint things with watercolors in the color of teal. Well, that may sound very nice, but can you show that in practice? Verifiably, repeatedly, that this personality type always does that, repeatedly, verifiably. Can you test it? And can it be a test that you can disprove? Anyway, so a lot of the common oversimplifications are very unscientific. One example that I want to mention is the classic that F's are illogical. And I always think that one's so funny because Carl Jung identified himself as an F, an INFJ, and Isabella Briggs-Myers identified herself as an INFP. If those two are Fs, Isabella Briggs-Myers and Carl Jung are really going to try to say that Fs are illogical, but these oversimplifications don't hold up in practice. So what happens very often in all kinds of fields, any field, is you have a theory that is very valid, perfectly valid, and then it becomes popular. And so a magazine science version of this theory becomes popular that is not the same as the original theory itself. Quantum mechanics is one that has suffered from this terribly. Quantum mechanics is a very cool theory. The magazine science version of it is kind of nutso and not the same as the actual theory and not verifiable and not correct. I'm not going to go into that. I was bringing it up as an example. Quantum mechanics itself is great, but there's always a magazine science version of so many different theories that becomes kind of nutso. Personality typing is no different. And a magazine science, really all it does is it reflects the insecurities, the biases, the desires of the people who are propagating it. So in terms of personality typing, when you see these inaccurate oversimplifications of personality typing, all you're getting is a glimpse into the mind of the person who said it. And so Khalees and I were discussing whether or not to name, there's one particular theory of personality typing, a very popular theory, that is kind of responsible for the dramatic majority of oversimplifications, painful, harmful, hurtful oversimplifications, this unscientific, unverifiable. Well, you can verify they're wrong. You can show in practice that these oversimplifications do not hold up. There's one theory of personality typing that's responsible for the vast majority of them, but I don't want to name it because the theory itself is really pretty good. It's just the magazine science versions of this very popular theory have been kind of crazy. So that's all, pretty much. Is personality typing and psychology in general scientific or not? It all depends. Is it being approached scientifically or not? No topic on any subject of any kind has to be inherently scientific or unscientific. Our individual approach to it can be wildly unscientific or very rigorously scientific. All right, so I just cut it. I started going off about a topic that I wanted to talk about, and then I was like, oh, I'm rambling here, and I cut it. And then Khalees said, hey, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, no one wants to hear that. But she reminded me that as an INFJ, often the times when I the most think that no one wants to hear that, are the times when people kind of want to hear it the most. I feel like no one wants to hear meaningful principles. I felt that when talking about the scientific method, I've been very safe. A lot of the people who are more liable to jump at you and be irrational while proclaiming how logical and rational they are, using the word science is a magic word to get them on your side. So I felt very safe talking about the scientific method. But I started going off at the end of the video before I cut it about ways to apply scientific method to your own life and how important that is. But then I was like, oh, no one wants to hear this, and I cut it before finishing what I was saying. So here I am back redoing it, Khalees saying that I shouldn't have cut it. Anyway, what I started to say before was I reminded you about Aristotle and warned you about falling for Aristotle's thing about, remember Aristotle thought two objects of different weights should fall at different rates. Two objects of different weights should fall at different rates, different speeds, and that wasn't the case. And I was reminding you, just because something makes sense to you doesn't mean it's going to be right in practice. So follow the scientific method in your life and see. And then I brought up Aristotle because Aristotle talked a little bit about how all human actions and desires funnel toward one great overall meta-desire. And I talked about the generic term, happiness is an insufficient but all right term to use for it. I don't mean giddiness, I don't mean being in a good mood. No, I mean that overall satisfaction, completeness, joy, whatever you want to call it, that every action goes to. Some people say, oh, humans are only after power and sex. Well, why after power and sex? Oh, because of our chemicals. Okay, well, that's kind of a circular argument. Why do our chemicals want that? What is the point? What to propagate the species? Okay, why? Just because of evolution? But the thing is, every action, every desire funnels toward this sense of satisfaction, happiness, completeness, joy, whatever. Whether it be seeking romance. And again, okay, as far as, let me just say right here, the idea that all human action comes down to desire for sex and power can be demonstrably disproven by so many human actions. Anyway, demonstrably, scientifically, experimentally disproven, but it doesn't matter. It's popular because it validates what some people want to believe, which is an unscientific attitude. But anyways, you can demonstrate, I believe, see for yourself, don't take my word for it, but you can demonstrate, I believe, that every action, every desire, every plan, even say a dictator's plan to take over the world, or a mother's plan to take care of her baby, or anything, every desire, every plan, every goal funnels down to this overall sense of completeness and happiness and joy, and that we're all after. And we sometimes do really stupid things thinking it's going to make us happy, and it might for a moment, because that's chemical high, but then, experimentally speaking, it ends up making us less happy. So applying scientific method to your life, what makes me more happy, what makes me less happy? And by happiness, I don't mean I mean the overall general term that we don't really have an English word for. You know, that general completeness. So anyway, so people make really dumb decisions all the time. And not mean to make people feel bad about that. I'm saying that as we remember the scientific method and apply it in our own lives, it's remarkable how much better things can go for us. There are so many things that we take for granted, except as, well, no one's ever really this happy, no couple is ever really that successful, no person is ever really this in control of themselves. All these things we take for granted, all these limits we place on things, why? Because we're not willing to follow the scientific method. Instead of saying man can't fly, let's follow the scientific method and say, how can man fly? Let's learn about how airfoils work. Let's learn about how air resistance works. Let's build the Wright Brothers airplane, and let's fly. You know, instead of placing limits on things, instead of saying no couple is that successful, say, let's experiment. How can a couple be more successful? No one's ever really that happy. Well, how can I be more happy? Because these things sure make me more happy, and these things make me unhappy. Let's experiment and follow the scientific method. No person's ever that in control. No person's ever that calm. Everyone who appears calm is really a monster inside and just has a mask on. Well, fine. That may be a hypothesis that really validates you and makes you feel better about the monster you're on the inside. Let's experiment. Let's see if it's actually demonstrably true or demonstrably false. And let's see. Can we experimentally see, are there ways a person can be more in control, more happy and joyful, or is it all fake? Let's experiment and let's see. There are so many things that these people like to sit around declaring their hypotheses as if they're true. Oh, blah, 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 all people are like this. All people of this type are like that. Well, that's a fine hypothesis. Let's test it and see. So anyway, there are all kinds of things that want to place limits on human nature, human potential, and what you as a person can be. And so I mentioned in the last video about the whole point and purpose of Al-Bab is to decondition us from those kind of harmful attitudes that throw away the independence of our own minds and say, well, society and culture tell you can't be this, you can't do this. No one's really that happy. No one's really, no couple's really that happy. No one's ever really that whatever. Experiment, follow the scientific method, and see. Instead of listening to these people who are spouting hypotheses in order to validate their own insecurities. So yeah, you can apply the scientific method in everything in life. Apply it to your ideologies, to your beliefs, and to your goals and your actions. See what works. What makes you happier? What makes you happier in the long term? So some may make you happy in the short term, but unhappier in the long term. Might have a net loss. Okay, let's follow that. Let's see. There are various little proverbs. Oh, money can't buy happiness. Okay, experiment upon that. See, in my experience, money does not buy happiness. I've been homeless before and been very, very happy and had goals in my life and knew where I was going, but because of things that happened, I was in a tough time at the time, and I did very, very well with it. But money can certainly help. I mean, this is an example. Money can help the happiness you have be able to do more. So anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked into specific examples. And it's talking about experiment in your life. Follow a scientific method and listen to it. When the world speaks, when nature speaks, when you do something, pay attention to what happens. It's just talking about paying attention to consequences. Really what the scientific method is in the end. Categorizing consequences. So scientific method is very important. And when you see trolls or anyone being unscientific about things, just recognize, oh, that's just their opinion, their hypothesis. They're spouting it as fact, probably because they're insecure about something. You don't have to listen to it. Experiment upon it, see if it's right or see if it's wrong. Try things out in your own life. Apply scientific method everywhere, and you will be amazed at how many of the ceilings that our culture tells us we can't pass. Oh, no one can ever pass this ceiling of happiness, this ceiling of success, this ceiling of whatever. You'll be amazed what you can do. And again, the whole purpose of Alibaba is to decondition you so that we can show you more about that. Not in a self-help way that'll help you now and then stop working 15 minutes from now. No, in a way that Alibaba really helps you as who you are. In a real, verifiably, repeatably usable way, like all scientific things are. So thank you for listening to that rant. Thank you, Khalees, for telling me to re-record it when I was like, oh, no one wants to hear that. And thank you for listening to this little mini-series. This is a great prerequisite. Now I can go on and talk about other things. So yeah, thank you all, and see you later.